Fallen Omens, a military horror story in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Part 1. Shadows in the Warp. The frigate Relentless drifted through the black abyss of the warp. It had been 3 days since it lost contact with the fleet, and the crew was beginning to realize that the way back might never be found. Captain Octavius Vorton sat in his command chair, arms crossed. His gaze swept over the observation screens, but they showed only the familiar crimson tides of the Imperium. "Navigator?" he asked dryly. The navigation priest, clad in ceremonial robes, slowly shook his head. "The Astronomican's light is weak." "Too weak, Captain." He swallowed. "Something is here. It watches us." Vorton tensed. "Something?" "Shadows. They move. We should not stay here." The captain gritted his teeth. "Nonsense! The Imperial Navy does not fear shadows." Whispers in the dark. The next day the disappearances began. First, a technician went missing in the engine rooms. When they searched for him, they found only his scorched uniform, and the Vox logs recorded nothing but distorted breathing. Then, 2 officers vanished from the 3rd deck. The last transmission captured their screams and an unintelligible whisper. When the deck officer disappeared, Vorton declared full quarantine. "What is happening?" he demanded of the chief astropath. "Warp corruption," came the reply. "Something is already here. It has been with us all along." The whispers in Vorton's mind grew louder. Fallen Omens. In one of the technical bays, they found runes carved into the metal, jagged symbols, burned into the hull with acid. But the most horrifying sight was in the center of the room. The navigator's corpse, suspended by chains. His skin had been flayed, and from his mutilated chest, a word was carved in an unknown language. A nearby technician collapsed to his knees. "He watches," the man whispered. "He is already here." The lights flickered. "Everyone to battle stations!" Vorton barked, drawing his bolt pistol. But it was too late. The shadows shifted. From the depths of the ship, the first scream echoed. Part 2. Ghost Ship. Vorton stepped forward, bolt pistol raised. The darkness in front of him writhed. "Reports!" The Vox channels burst to life. Shadows in the corridors. "The armory is locked down! They're coming!" The captain turned to Chief Tech Priest Maltek. "What are we dealing with?" "The warp has entered the ship's structure," the priest muttered. "We may already be dead." "Nonsense." But deep down, Vorton was no longer sure. Fallen voices. On the 3rd deck, the crew faced the shadows. At first, they seemed like mere darkness, but then figures emerged. They looked like men, but they were withered, charred husks with hollow eyes. "Open fire!" Bolters roared, tearing the shadows apart, but they kept advancing. Vorton retreated behind a barricade. "Fall back to the engine room!" They ran as the Relentless groaned. The warp was consuming the ship. The eye of the abyss. In the engine room, they found it. Suspended in the air, above the sacred machinery of the Omnissiah, hung a massive pulsating eye. "This is a gate," the tech priest whispered. "A gate? To what?" "To him." And then the voice echoed in their minds. "You are already here." Vorton felt reality break. The end, or the beginning. Relentless vanished from Imperial records 7 days later. When it was found, it was empty. Only a single Vox transmission repeated endlessly. He is already here. Fallen Omens. Part 3. The Price of Knowledge. The derelict frigate. Relentless drifted in silence. Its corridors now nothing more than a steel tomb. The Imperium had declared the ship lost, but that did not mean it would remain undisturbed. A boarding party from the Crimson Omen, an inquisitorial vessel, had been sent to investigate. Led by Inquisitor Adrastia Kale, they had strict orders: assess, cleanse, and if necessary, destroy. The team of 8 stormed the darkened halls, their bolters raised. The air smelled of rust, decay, and something else. Something wrong. "Auspex is acting up," muttered Sergeant Dane, tapping his scanner. Adrastia's storm-grey eyes flicked to the readings. The ship's atmosphere was breathable but stagnant. No life signs. "Keep moving. This ship will not give up its secrets easily." But the ship was already watching them. The First Omen. They advanced down the corridors, flashlights sweeping across flaking walls and broken machinery. "Vox log still active," Tech Priest Eras announced, tapping into a terminal. Static hissed, then a voice crackled through. "He is already here." The team tensed. "Play the last recorded entry," Adrastia ordered. The Vox screamed. A distorted voice, warped and inhuman, whispered, "Look behind you!" The lights flickered. Sergeant Dane spun, bolter raised. Nothing! "Trick of the warp!" he growled. But his voice betrayed unease. Eris hesitated. "Inquisitor, I am detecting structural shifts. The ship is changing." Adrastia narrowed her eyes. "Define changing." "Corridors are rearranging themselves." A sharp clang echoed through the ship. "We are not alone," whispered Adept Leon, the Psyker. His breathing quickened. Then the screaming began. The price of knowledge. Trooper Vero was the first to fall. A shadow stretched from the ceiling, solidifying into a figure with hollow eyes and burned flesh. "Contact!" Dine roared, unloading his bolter. The rounds struck the figure, but the shadow barely reacted before lunging at Varro. The trooper barely had time to scream before the thing ripped him into the walls, his body disappearing into the steel as if it had never existed. "Emperor's mercy!" Someone cursed. The shadows began to move. "Fall back!" Adrastia barked. They ran, but the corridors shifted, blocking their path. The ship was alive, and it was hungry. The gateway. The team was forced toward the engine room. When they burst in, they saw it. The pulsating eye still floated above the sacred engines. It was larger now, its iris swirling with something endless. Leon clutched his head. "It is looking at us." Adrastia gritted her teeth. "What is it?" Eris whispered, voice trembling. "A gate, a passage into the warp itself." The eye pulsed, and then the whispers began again. "You should not be here." The shadows came alive. Black tendrils lashed out, ensnaring Eris, dragging him toward the eye. "Inquisitor!" he screamed. Adrastia fired, but it was too late. Eris vanished into the abyss. The team was breaking. Dain grabbed a melter charge. "We end this now!" He rushed forward, planting the explosive on the nearest console. The shadows shrieked. "Go!" Adrastia ordered. They turned and ran as the melter charge detonated, flames consuming the room. The ship screamed. The escape! They ran through shifting corridors, fighting off shadows that clawed at their minds. Only 4 of them made it to the docking bay. The shuttle was still there. By the Emperor's will, it was still there. They boarded and launched just as the Relentless began to fold in on itself, the warp consuming its prize. As the ship vanished, Adrastia collapsed into a seat. Dain sat opposite her, panting. What in the throne's name was that? Adrastia's eyes darkened. Knowledge that should never be found. The silence stretched. Then the shuttle's vox crackled. A voice whispered, impossibly familiar. You brought it with you! The lights flickered. To be continued.